So I'm going to give a talk tonight called Seeing Things as They Really Are, as part of this series on what is enlightenment. And I'm using, or my talk has really been inspired by two books that I've been reading over the years. The first one is called What is the Buddha? By Bhante Sangha. And the second one is called The Life of the Buddha by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli. And both of these books, among other things, describe the enlightenment of the Buddha, sort of speaking about it in terms of his life story, largely. They get their information from the texts of the Pali Canon, the texts that collected up the very teachings that the Buddha himself gave 2,500 years ago. So we've been exploring in this series the question, we've been asking this question, what is enlightenment? And by asking this question, we're really looking into the heart of Buddhism itself. And yet very often enlightenment seems an impossible thing, doesn't it? It's something way beyond our grasp, something that, we're just never going to attain in our lifetime. But I'm going to try and evoke for you this evening that actually it's very, very close to us. It's very, very close. We can come into a vivid relationship with it. A relationship that can inspire us and nourish us in our lives and in our practice. So I'll begin by reciting to you a few lines which are called the Buddha's Song of Victory, which apparently burst forth from the Buddha in the moments after he got enlightened. I have gone through many rounds of birth and death, looking in vain for the builder of this body. Heavy indeed is birth and death again and again. But now I have seen you, house builder. You shall not build this house again. Its beams are broken, its dome is shattered, self-will is extinguished, nirvana is attained. So the Buddha sings this song, expressing the experience that he's had of enlightenment in terms of a metaphor. And that metaphor is a house being sort of dismantled, taken apart piece by piece, exploded, destroyed even. And this is a way of describing the experience of breaking free of attachment to the notion of having a fixed and separate self. And I don't know if you can remember all those weeks ago when Kalyana D gave the first talk in the series, but she, in a way, these lines echo the very spirit with which the Gautama left home and set out on his quest for enlightenment in the first place. You might remember he was compelled to get away from the dusty household life which was kind of stifling. And he needed to get out there into the open air and embark on his quest to find the meaning of life, the meaning of suffering, the key that would deliver him and all beings from the sufferings of the human condition. So he left home in his 20s, and his quest must have lasted quite a few years, because I think he was in his late 20s when he left home, and then he was in his mid 30s when he finally sort of sat down under a peepal tree and vowed not to move until, by means of meditation, he'd broken through to the truth of the way things are, to an understanding of the nature of consciousness and reality itself. So it must have taken about 6 years, this quest. And accounts vary as to how long, once he'd actually sat down, how long it took him to attain enlightenment. But in reality, at the point where he is breaking through to this extraordinary state of consciousness, the whole concept of time and space begins to break down anyway. So on one level, of course, it's true to say that the Buddha attained enlightenment 2,500 years ago. But on another level, I mean, of course, 2,500 years ago, that's a very, very long time, a very, very long time. But on another level, the constrictions of time and space fall away at the Enlightenment. And there's a very real sense in which I think you can say his enlightenment is kind of happening now. Now, everything is happening now. There is no past or future. It's as close to us as a heartbeat. Yeah. So what is enlightenment? How can we talk about it? Even though intellectually I absolutely believe in the truth of what I've just said, that the enlightenment is as close to us as a heartbeat. Nevertheless, you know, I must put my hand on my heart and say that there's something getting in the way of me really experiencing that and appreciating it, the reality of it. So what is it that gets in the way? I mean, I have my worldly attachments, my worldly concerns. I can't just drop all of that now and go into the homeless life as the Buddha did. But I do want to understand more fully what this enlightenment experience is. I want to work gently and methodically on loosening the bonds of self so that I can get closer to the Buddha. So another metaphor that is sometimes used for the event of the Enlightenment, and one that Bhante Sangharakshita mentions in this book, is that it's sort of a bit like hatching out of an egg, a sort of a psychophysical hatching out of an egg. The Buddha broke out of the ordinary everyday consciousness into something quite extraordinary, something expansive, something cosmic and joyous, beyond what we can imagine from our puny earthbound perspective. And the poet Rumi explores this idea in a poem about an embryo that I thought I would share with you. So this is Rumi's poem. Think how it is to have a conversation with an embryo. You might say to the embryo, the world outside is vast and intricate. There are wheat fields and mountain passes and orchards in bloom. At night, there are millions of galaxies, and in sunlight, the beauty of friends dancing at a wedding. Why do you stay cooped up there in the dark with your eyes closed? And listen to the embryo's answer. There is no other world. I only know what I have experienced. You must be hallucinating. So the point is that, you know, a chick in an egg or an embryo in the womb quite simply doesn't have any idea of what an extraordinary world there could be out there beyond the confines of the shell or the womb. It kind of takes an act of imagination, of courage and faith to sort of break out of that and make a transition into a new world, into a new consciousness. And that's, of course, the heroic achievement of the Buddha. He is sometimes referred to as the firstborn, being compared in a way to the first chick in a clutch of eggs in a nest to hatch out. Apparently, in nature, when the first chick has hatched out of the egg in a little clutch of eggs, it will then tap on the shells of the other eggs to give his unborn siblings some intimation of what's possible, to give them some help and encouragement in hatching out of the egg themselves. And the Buddha is compared to that. He's called the firstborn, the one who leads the way out into this expanded consciousness. So we can conceive of enlightenment as the dismantling of a house, the house of the self, or hatching out of an egg from a more limited state of consciousness to a much more expanded one. And this dismantling of things and this hatching out of a limiting or limited situation is prefigured a number of times in Siddhartha Gautama's life story. He is always escaping being, you could say that he's always escaping being pinned down and narrowly defined. So he goes on this quest for enlightenment, and he tries a number of disciplines in order to train himself. So he lived in a world, in a culture that was highly sophisticated in terms of exploring consciousness and expanded states of consciousness. And he went to various schools to train in meditation and, if you like, philosophy of mind. He joined one community that was led by a teacher called Alara Kalama. And very quickly, he got the hang of Kalama's teachings and deeply impressed his teacher, to the point where Kalama invited him to co-lead the community with him. But the Buddha, or Gautama as he was then, couldn't be content with co-leading this school, and he went to find something else. And he joined another community with another teacher called Uddaka Ramaputta. And again, quickly he learned the practices. He became as attained as the teacher, deeply impressed Uddaka. And Uddaka said, look, why don't you just take over? I mean, you should lead this community. But again, the Buddha, or Gautama as he was then, wasn't satisfied with that. He couldn't be satisfied with that. He knew that these teachings didn't have the salty flavor of freedom that he knew he needed to really sort of find the key to the human condition. So he moved on again. So time and time again, like the chick hatching out of an egg, he sort of strikes out on his own. Many of us would be more than content with what was being offered to him there then. And in fact, maybe that's the right thing for us. But Gautama needed to step out into the unknown again and again. So that's something to think about, really. How do we know when it's appropriate for us to graduate, to acknowledge that we've outgrown our teacher? What can you really rely upon as an indicator that you are on the road to truth? Are there any eggs that you're currently in that you might one day want to hatch out of? So Gautama, leaving these teachers behind, goes and practices in the forest in an attempt to confront fear, or not with an attempt, he does confront fear. And then he goes on to take on practices of austerity, starving himself to the very brink of death in an attempt to get beyond this physical experience. But still, he excels in all of these practices. He impresses others with his excellence, but still he himself is not content. He's still driven by the desire to find the truth, an unworldly truth which tastes of freedom and is characterized by a loving and compassionate attitude. So tonight I haven't got time, I don't think, to talk in very much detail about the thing that happens next, traditionally in the story. A very famous episode in which Gautama, recovering from the effects of the extreme austerity practices, he stops, he takes some refreshments, he recovers a little, and he takes stock, relaxing by the side of a river. And as he does so, as he sort of lets go of the whole project, for at least for a few moments, a powerful memory of when he was a child comes to him. He remembers sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his father ploughing a field. And this is a blissfully happy memory for Gautama. And all I can say really about this story is that I think it's a very key turning point in his journey. And I think it's significant that it's a sort of a timeless moment. I wanted to call it super chronological, which is a word I just made up, but I don't think it's a very good word. Maybe a better word would be polychronological, because what I mean is, it's like when he's in that reverie, he steps out of ordinary time. He enters into what I've called a non-quotidian. So quotidian is a beautiful word. It just means ordinary, everyday. So he steps out of the ordinary, everyday space. And the past becomes very alive in the presence. In the present, this past memory of watching his father when he was a child. And all the ordinary sort of linear distinctions of time, it's sort of beginning to sort of melt away at that point. And that's a very auspicious moment. And it's when he's in that sort of soft, open, receptive mode that things really start to happen for him. And in that moment, when he's watching his father ploughing the field, it seems as though it's as if everything becomes super distinct in his perception. Everything, each tiny detail presents itself to his awareness in all of its utter beauty and mystery. It's like it's an access of mindfulness. It's a sort of poetic, meditative, creative, flowing state. It's like he's shrunk down to a tiny size and he can see everything as if it's through a microscope. And I think we do have moments like that, don't we? We have moments where everything seems more alive than usual. And we see, maybe we're just sitting in the garden watching ants crawling up and down a blade of grass or something like that. And at the same time, we just get a sense of the mystery of life, the extraordinariness of life. Or when you're looking at the stars in the sky, you know, you suddenly get a sense of the enormity of the cosmos. And I read a poem recently in which Adrian Rich describes a moment like this, and I thought I would share it with you. I've sat on a stone fence above a great, soft, sloping field of musing heifers, a farmstead slanting its plains calmly in the calm light, a dead elm raising bleached arms above a green so dense with life, minute, momentary life, slugs, moles, pheasants, gnats, spiders, moths, hummingbirds, groundhogs, butterflies. A lifetime is too narrow to understand it all. I think that's the kind of moment that Gautama is remembering when he saw his father ploughing the field, and it was as if he could see all the creatures in the soil wriggling about, and he could see the birds and the leaves, everything in an intense and vivid detail. And at a moment like this, the boundaries between ordinary perception and a higher state of consciousness have sort of thinned out. They've become more attenuated. If you had like a subtle knife, you could cut through this reality and break out into another dimension. And someone as ethically pure as Gautama has, metaphorically speaking, such a knife as this. And a moment like this is extremely auspicious. So inspired by that vision, Gautama seems to sort of enter into a different zone. And the whole landscape around him, a grove of trees, a flowing river, which is the whole landscape. It's beautiful, but it's nothing special. It's quite ordinary in a way, although it is secluded. It's away from other human beings. But for the Buddha, it becomes this kind of mythic, enchanted space. Everything is full of meaning. And it's not just that he's aware of the earthworms in the ground and the birds in the sky. He's also connected to other forms of consciousness, the earth goddess that Samudragosha was talking about, sprites in the trees, the water deities, gods and goddesses. So he takes his place in this kind of enchanted landscape. He sits down underneath a tree and he vows that he will not move until he reaches enlightenment. And when the person who sat down to meditate under that tree gets up again, he is no longer Siddhartha Gautama. He is the Buddha, the awakened one. And during this meditation, his consciousness has penetrated to a realm beyond time and space. It is spoken of in the old texts, in the Pali Canon, in terms of the opening of a divine eye with which the Buddha can discern all of his past lives. So apparently he saw all of his past lives, hundreds of them, rising and falling, unfolding in front of his eyes, and being able to see them all in one go, as it were. He's also able to fully understand and know. He experiences directly the workings of karma throughout all of those existences. He sees fully and deeply the law of dependent arising as it has played out in all of his previous lives. This being, that becomes, with the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that does not become. With the ceasing of this, that ceases. So the Buddha sees, the Buddha sees. And the thing is, if the Buddha's enlightenment happens outside of time and space, so that he can see everything that's ever happened and everything that will happen, if the Buddha's enlightenment happens outside of time and space, it didn't just happen 2,500 years ago. It's kind of happening now as well. And it's like we are each in our own little eggs, our own little shells of darkness and ignorance, more or less happily dreaming our existences away. And our elder sibling, the Buddha, is kind of knocking on our shells, saying, hey, there's more to life than you can find within your shell. And if we do think of the Enlightenment as happening in historical time, that's the time when the world changes. The world suddenly becomes a place of extraordinary potential, almost like a sort of a chemical reaction. And we are, in a way, the recipients of that legacy that's been given to us by the Buddha as he breaks through. So, according to the scriptures, quite a lot happens in the weeks after this extraordinary moment of enlightenment. The Buddha spent some weeks staying in this enchanted landscape of trees and a river. He stayed there, I suppose, in order to sort of process, if you like, the after effects of this breakthrough, so that he can make them intelligible to himself in human terms, so that he can then teach the Dharma. So he needs time, as it were, to process things, to come back to earth. I sort of imagine maybe it was a bit like that time when you're waking up from a dream. I don't know whether you experience this, but when you wake up from a dream, you go through this process of translating it, I think. It's one thing to be actually in a dream, to be experiencing a dream. That's one thing. But then there's this kind of bardo state, isn't there? There's this transitional state when you wake up and you remember the dream and you're making sense of the dream and you're pushing it into words so that you could maybe tell people about it or write it down. And that's a process of translation. And during that process of turning the dream into something that you can write down or tell to somebody else, inevitably you reduce it, you boil the content of it down a bit. The dream itself was far richer and more extraordinary than you can really put into words. And I think that this description of what happens to the Buddha after his enlightenment, it's a bit like that. He's trying to work out how he's going to communicate this extraordinary experience in ways that other human beings are going to be able to understand. So the Buddha stays in this grove of trees, coursing in this post-enlightenment phase. And I'm following Nyanamoli's description in this quite extraordinary book, which I think is an amazing, miraculous book. And I can't tell you why, because I haven't got time. But anyway, in this book, he describes in some detail what happens after the Buddha's enlightenment, and he gets it all from the original ancient scriptures. And first of all, according to Nyanamoli, the Buddha formulates the Four Noble Truths, then the three Lakshanas, then the teaching of Praticca Samutpada, dependent arising. So these are really key conceptual forms of the teachings that are very easy for us to memorize and learn. So if you don't know those teachings off by heart now, make a mental note that you're going to do that as soon as you can, because those are the basic conceptual teachings of the Buddha that you can really benefit from having at your fingertips to reflect on. So the Buddha sort of formulated those teachings during this phase, and then he starts to retrace what are the practices that got him here. And tradition says that he was turning this over in his mind whilst sitting under a banyan tree. And I suddenly noticed time has just disappeared. And the first thing he noticed was the 5 spiritual faculties, which if you cultivate them and take them as far as you can, then you will get to the brink of enlightenment. The Buddha remembers the 5 spiritual faculties: energy, faith, energy, mindfulness, meditation, and understanding. And just as he formulated that thought, the tradition has it, it was as if that very thought of the Buddha tickled the fancy of a being happily existing in the realm of the gods, a certain Brahma Sampati. And Brahma Sampati is a being who exists in the realm of the gods, a state higher than the state of consciousness. And in the ancient Indian imagination, these sorts of beings existed all around in God realms, sort of in a different dimension to the one that we live in. And when Brahma Sampati became aware in his mind of the thought in the Blessed One's mind, as soon as a strong man might extend his flexed arm, or as soon as a strong man might flex his extended arm, Brahma Sampati vanished in the God realm and appeared before the Buddha, arranging his robe carefully on his left shoulder. He raises his hands, palms together towards the Blessed One, and says, "So it is, so it is. That is just how I practiced the Dharma in a previous existence. And look at me now. Sadhu, sadhu." So Brahma Sampati is encouraging the Buddha, saying, yes, that's the way to teach it. And again, the Buddha reflects on how he got to this state of enlightenment. And he remembers how he became aware of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Awareness of body, of feeling, of mind, of objects of mind, became aware of those spheres of experience at the same time as practicing renouncing craving, and how this took him a very long way towards enlightenment. And again, this thought tickles the fancy of Brahma Sampati, living in the God realm. So he pops out of the God realm into the realm of human beings, appears before the Buddha, arranges his robe on one shoulder, puts his palms together, bows towards the Buddha and says, yes, that's how it is. That's how it is. That's how I practiced. And look at me. Look how far I've come. So who is this Brahma Sampati? I think he's both a very serious and important character, but there's also something quite comic about him. And I think that he's there to show that the Buddha is actually much bigger than any kind of God. He's attained something far more than any kind of puny little God figure can attain. The Buddha is bigger than that. So Brahma Sampati is a super conscious being, but he's not fully enlightened. He can fly through space and time as if it were as easy as flexing a muscle. But the Buddha doesn't even need to do that. The Buddha is as big as space and time because he's achieved enlightenment. So tradition says, and I will finish very soon, tradition says that there was another reflection that the Buddha underwent at this time. And this is the Buddha's reflection. This Dharma that I have attained is so profound and hard to see. I very much doubt if human beings are capable of seeing it the way I do. They are so attached to life, to families, to sensual pleasures, so caught up in worldly affairs, they just won't be able to break through. If I teach this so profound and so hard to see, so hard to discover, they will not understand me and I shall find it troublesome and wearying. So after all of this, the Buddha realizes it's going to be very, very hard to get people to understand the nature of enlightenment. And he's on the point of giving up. He's on the point of turning away and leaving us all enclosed in our little eggs. But once more, Brahma Sampati, the being in the God realm, becomes aware of what's going on in the Buddha's mind. And he pops back, throws himself at the feet of the Buddha and says, the world will be lost. The world will be utterly lost. For the mind of the perfect one, accomplished and fully enlightened, favors inaction and not teaching the Dharma. Lord, let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. Let the Sublime One teach the Dharma. There are creatures with but little dust on their eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dharma. Some of them are capable of gaining final knowledge. So the Buddha listened to Brahma Sampati, and with the power of his divine eye, the Buddha looked out over the world, and he perceived that the beings of the world were at widely differing stages of development. As he saw it, the world was like a muddy lake full of lotus plants. Some people were deeply immersed in the world like lotus buds buried deep in the mud. Others were not so completely engrossed in the world and were beginning to emerge like lotuses from the muddy waters of the world. And there were a few who stood clear above those waters, ready to burst into bloom and into the sunlight of the truth. So the Buddha says, wide open are the doors to the deathless. Let those who have ears to hear release their faith. And he begins to turn towards the world and start to teach the Dharma. So, sorry, I've gone over time horribly, but we're going to go into our groups now. And these are the questions I'd like you to think about. Have you ever experienced a moment of enchantment, like the one that the Buddha experienced, the memory of the rose apple tree? What eggs do you think you might benefit from hatching out of? What things get in the way of a more expansive view of yourself and your potential? How can you work on this gently and methodically?